Welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast, your source for all things bourbon. Join your hosts, Mark and Matt, as they drink and review bourbons, share news about upcoming events, interview the who's who in the bourbon world, and, most importantly, bring you along for the fun of living the bourbon life. Now, here's your hosts, Mark and Matt.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me here live tonight in the Bourbon Life Studios, it is my good friend, my bourbon drinking buddy, Matt. Matt, how you doing out there, man?
Mark, I'm great out here. How are you? Everything good in there?
I'm doing great, man. Got everything under control, no technical difficulties tonight.
That's right. We after a long break, it seemed like we finally remastered technology.
Yeah, man, I'm telling you, it was like after 5 years, you think we'd have this stuff down, but I'm telling you, that's why I was like, Matt, let's go downstairs a little early, man, and make sure that we're logging in and everything's working properly. But we are working properly, so we're thrilled to be here. Of course, we are the Bourbon Life Podcast. We appreciate all of our sponsors, everything they do for us. We couldn't bring you this show every week without all of their support. Matt, with that said, man, let's just jump right into it. You want to tell everybody who we have with us tonight?
Absolutely. Let's do it. We've got the co-founder and master distiller of West Fork Whiskey Co. in Westfield, Indiana, Julian Jones. Julian, welcome onto the show. Good to have you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man, this was a little short notice, man. We really appreciate that. We got your whiskey a couple of weeks ago, and I was thrilled to get that. And you guys work with a good friend of ours with Estes PR. We love those guys. So I was happy appreciate you guys jumping in and making this happen, man. So we're really excited to do this and to hear about your brand and hear about the company and get a little bit more information about you as well, man. So this will be a lot of fun and a good night. And we've got a couple things. You guys sent us 3 different things. And I'll tell everybody that Matt and I are still doing dry January, man. So it is, unfortunately, even though the show will come out, no, it'll still be January. Yeah. So, but yeah, we're still doing dry January. So we're swishing and spitting one final time. This will be the end of it.
Painful. This has been a
thankfully.
painful one.
This has been rough, man. It really has.
You know, it has, because we got buried in with that winter storm.
Yeah, man.
Indoors for days on end.
Alone with your thoughts and no bourbon, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I've been sick the last 5 days, man. And all I've wanted is a hot toddy. I'm just like, if I could just have a hot toddy, life would be so much better. But no, I'm drinking like ginger tea and crap. Like my wife's like, you got to drink this herbal tea. It's really good. I'm like, no, this is not even close to what I want with a hot toddy, man. So I'm just a couple of days away. But yeah, you got some great products here for us to try. So if you want to, we're going to start out with this, the Old Hamer Cask Strength. You want to tell everybody a little bit about that? That'd be great.
Yeah, so Old Hamer is our sourced brand. We worked with MGP to kind of really revive, an old brand from where all 3 of the co-founders are from. So West Fork Whiskey is a very Indiana-centric, corn-forward, high corn bourbon company. All 3 of the co-founders come from Bedford, Indiana, which is really close to what is now Spring Mill State Park, used to be the Old Hamer family farm. So we basically were kind of searching for a way to reach more people. We are grain to glass with our other products, but we were trying to bring something uniquely Indiana, high corn, high quality, approachable in price to the market, and this is where we landed. It's a 99% corn, 1% malted barley recipe, so it is a very unique mash bill, especially even from MGP. Mm-hmm. And this particular release, I believe, comes in around 115 proof.
I think this one we have is actually 118.
Oh, it is. Okay. So they fall somewhere between 115 and 120, usually at the 5-year-old age, roughly, that we release these single barrels, and they're aged generally in 4-char Speyside casks.
Okay. Now this one says at the bottom of this label, it says actually batch number. So is this a batched cask strength?
So yeah, I'll tell you, in fair and full disclosure, this cask strength is generally 1 to 2 barrels maximum.
Okay.
And they are barrels from our own site. We own 99% corn, 1% malted barley barrels all over Indiana and Kentucky. But the barrels that we choose for this are generally ones that we are aging on site, and they're generally 1 to 2 batch barrels max.
Okay. All right. So really almost just could be a single barrel, or if not, at the most going to be 2 barrels.
Exactly.
So that's really
the cool thing about it, right, is MGP's awesome at hitting generally a tasting profile, but there's differences batch to batch. So
yeah,
anyway.
that can be a lot of work
unique
blending there. Only two barrel or one barrel blends as they need to come together.
It is.
Making sure that you got something kind of homogeneous enough, but
yeah, most of my work goes into that barrel selection, blending. And I'll tell you too, we use purified hard water instead of RO water for our blending, very much on purpose. I really like what it does specifically to this mash bill. So we obviously use some very fancy filters to take out all the heavy metals and, chlorines, chloramines, all that iron, all that nasty stuff that would be at the detriment of the flavor, but leave in the hardness. So
yeah, but no water in this one. This is cask strength. So
this is cask strength. So obviously
straight from the barrel here.
Yep.
Yeah, very nice. Matt, what do you pick up on the nose on this one, man?
Oh no, Julian, rip it on. Go ahead,
please,
man.
please. I'm so. What I love about this is it's super soft and sweet, and I get like that kind of very typical vanillin or vanillin flavor with some of that kind of caramel you get from a typical 4-grain, but also like I get cherry and I get a lot of stone fruit on this one, right? As well as just I usually get just a hint of like the bubble gum that was pink, the kind of bubble gum you used to buy forever ago, and it just like lost its flavor in like 4 chews.
Yeah. I use
Mark will sit here and wax poetic for hours about that bubble gum. He knows it well.
Yeah. It's the Tops, like the Tops baseball card packs. We used to open it up and you had that stick gum that would crumble into pieces, but it was that pink and it had like that cornstarch white powder, whatever on it.
And 3 or 4 chews and it was gone, right?
And it was gone. That was it. Flavor is gone. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Matt, do you pick anything else? He got some great. See, Matt, you got off the. See,
I did. I got off the hook
Matt.
here, man. Julian,
so Matt
you're
got off the hook. Julian,
my hero on this one. I got to say, I love the 99-1 mash bill out of Lawrenceburg, Indiana. I think it's such an underutilized mash bill, and I think it really delivers on a lot of levels. It brings that softness that you were talking about, Julian, with the corn comes across. Like a soft, subtle sweetness to it. Then it really leans heavy into those vanillas. A little butterscotch comes out to me, almost like a corn syrup type. Think of like pecan pie, kind of that corn syrup filling type note. And then surprisingly enough, on most Indiana 99-1s, at the end of the nose, I'll pick up like a little bit of mint or something a little herbal kind of comes across to me on most of the ones that I've smelled in the past, and this one certainly has it. It's really nice. I love this mash bill. I think it's really great.
The only other thing I would add is just I get like a very slight hint of oak, which nothing much, but there's just a little bit of oakiness coming through to me.
Yeah.
But everything else you guys just hit right on. That bubble gum is like spot on though, man. I love it.
Yep. And it is
nice.
it's a very interesting, and I think you just incepted me with that bit of herbalness at the end. That's usually something I obviously pull from higher rye mash bills, right? Especially MGP's really high rye mash bills, right? And their rye whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
But I do get a little bit of, it's like that little touch of that like old fashioned cough medicine, almost like that subtle star anise, right? Like that they used to flavor way back in the day before you had cherry cough drops, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. It's usually to me such a rye unanimous, especially MGP rye, getting that little bit of mint, but something about their 99-1 right at the end, it lets a little something playful in there.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a quick question, and you can explain this to our listeners because people hear about corn whiskey, and there are requirements to be a corn whiskey. You guys at 99-1, people will say, "Oh, that could be a corn whiskey," but there's other requirements for bourbon that aren't necessarily there for corn whiskey. So can you kind of just give a little analysis or the distinction on that?
Yeah, so sure. The easiest way to kind of differentiate the two is, does it go into a new barrel or does it go into a once used barrel, right? Corn whiskey goes into a used barrel. You can think of it on an aging profile more like a single malt or a scotch. right?
Yeah.
Whereas the 99.1 that we're talking about here and high corn bourbons, which I mentioned, right, they meet all the criteria for bourbon. They're 51% corn. I don't distill them any more than 180. They don't go into the barrel at any more than 125. New American oak barrel, right? All the things that we all know make bourbon. They do that. They're just at a much higher corn content. So they still qualify, but you're right. There is kind of a misunderstanding there that like people think there can be too much corn in it for it to still be a bourbon. You can make 100% corn bourbon as long as you put it in a New American oak barrel, right? So and that's really the main distinction.
With corn whiskey too, I think you can actually take an uncharred new barrel, right? And
yes,
put it
toasted.
in that.
And you can use wine barrels. You can use it's kind of whatever, any type of used barrel, non-charred barrel. But as soon as you put it in a charred barrel, if you meet all the other requirements, obviously it's bourbon.
Yeah. So there you go, kids. Now you understand it can be a 99 percent corn, and it's not necessarily considered a corn whiskey. So I just thought that might be a good point, because we don't talk a lot. We don't have a lot of 99, high corn content bourbons on here. So I think
unfortunately it scares a lot of seasoned bourbon drinkers off, because I feel like they get burnt by some maybe lesser quality corn whiskeys that have come out. And corn whiskey, it's a way more of a wild card and wild arena than is corn bourbon, right? Changing that barrel from whatever used barrel you want it to be to a new barrel makes two very different products.
Yeah, that's a valid point for sure. So, Julian, let's jump back and talk about you a little bit. Sure. If you don't care, just tell us a little bit about your background. I know we were talking a little bit before we started. You talked about a little scientific background. So, can you talk a little bit about, where you're from? You kind of mentioned that earlier, but talk about that and, your background and your experience. And before you got into bourbon, we'll talk about the creation of the brand in the second round, but just kind of talk about everything leading up to the point of the creation of the brand.
Yeah. So I grew up in southern Indiana in a small town just south of Bloomington called Bedford. Big science nerd ever since I was young, was always interested in the way things work, how to build things, was a woodworker in high school and in college. Pursued my undergraduate degree in biochemistry from DePaul University over in Greencastle, and then got a master's in biology from Purdue, and actually went to 3 out of 4 years of medical school out at Albany Medical College in Albany, New York.
Wow.
Before I realized I literally wanted to do anything else for a living. But at the same time, luckily, my brother, who's another co-founder and longtime family friend, third co-founder, were getting very bored with their day jobs. Our fathers were whiskey collectors, and this was kind of the early teens when really the bourbon craze was hitting its full stride, right? A lot of the things that you used to be able to find on the shelf that were delicious were starting to disappear. We also thought it was silly, right, that Kentucky especially was using a large degree of Indiana corn and making the world's best, if you will, bourbons. So a lot of things came together in a weird way, so that we were just kind of young and dumb enough to be like, hey, should we start something really cool here in Indiana, because we have hard water, we have, all the things. I'm the science guy. The other guys are a banker and a lawyer by trade. So it was just kind of serendipity, if you will. And taking a huge chance.
Sure. But that's cool. You guys had the background, because you've got an attorney who can handle certain things. You got a finance guy that can do those aspects of it. And then you got you, that's the science guy. So, I mean, you can't ask for probably a better combination of three people to decide to start a distillery with, right?
Not. And a lot of people think, I would be one of these naive people, right? Like I think I could start a bourbon company just knowing how to make bourbon. But I mean, the business and the law are equal parts of really getting a functioning thing off of the floor, just because of the regulatory apparatus around bourbon, right, and all the other things. So there's tons of stuff that I can do that my partners can't, and vice versa. Yeah, that sounds like a great combination, and we'll talk some more about them as well. So I'm kind of curious. You guys are it's in Westfield, right? Correct. Yeah.
And where is that specifically located?
So we are just off of 31 on 191st Street on the north side of Grand Park. It is 10 East 191st Street in Westfield, Indiana. So for those of you who don't know, there is a gigantic sports complex in Westfield, Indiana. I think it's one of the biggest in the Midwest. We are right on the north side of that on about 12 and a half acres. And it's really kind of a new development area, and we have some space, so hopefully there's some cool announcements that we will have coming up as far as our land use. But yeah, we're right there, and kind of what is the north side of Westfield?
So I hate to sound stupid, but being from Kentucky, I don't know much about Indiana.
Oh, sorry.
So where is that?
So we're on the north side of Indianapolis. Yeah. So
Indianapolis. Okay. That's
Indianapolis
what
is about as perfect. Sure. Like the bypass in Indianapolis is about of a perfect circle as they get around major cities, and kind of dots the whole county. If you go around to the north side and you take it about 10 minutes north of Indianapolis, we're right off of the main road right there.
I gotcha. Okay. Because I wasn't sure, because I was thinking Westfield. I'm like, is this, and I should have looked it up on a map before we started just to see, but I was thinking, is it kind of rural?
Oh, it used to be 10 years ago, it was all farmland, and now it's one of the fastest growing areas of Indianapolis. It's right by Carmel, Indiana, which generally goes on lists of the richest county, the biggest growth, the most businesses, all those things. So we're right there, just north of that area.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate that explanation, because I was thinking, is it hard to be out in the country somewhere doing a distillery, but you're not really out in the country?
And we kind of are, because we bought what is converted farmland, and all of it's next to us is converted farmland, but it's all being gobbled up by developers, and it's going to become lots of things in the next 2 to 3 years. So it was, but it's not going to be.
Yeah, that's exciting for you guys, though. I mean, that's and we'll talk about in the third round, potential for growth in the future and what that looks like, but we'll get there a little bit shortly. So I'm just kind of curious. Have you always been a bourbon fan, bourbon drinker? Is that something that's always been on your
ever since
radar,
I was born? No.
Hey, our parents put it in the bottles here, or rub it on their kids' gums.
They used to. So, it used to be a real thing. I mean, for teething, it was for sure. So I actually got into whiskey, I would say, with Irish whiskey. It felt very approachable to me. I was a big Redbreast fan for a number of years when I started drinking. And then I kind of made my way to Scotch. Highlands first, the kind of sweeter, more palatable, easier drinking Scotches. And then I went hardcore and was an Islay guy for a minute, like my Lafroig and Lagavulin, right? And then I woke up one day and I was like, oh, the smoke is not for me. I'm done with it. And then that's where I really kind of found my stride. I would say, when I was maybe around 23, maybe 24, I was all ready to I like bourbon. I mostly like bourbon and rye and high proof bourbon and rye. And that's kind of still where I live, in that 100 to cask strength region.
So with
that's where the party,
two partners,
where the party is. Go ahead.
One in finance, the other in compliance or in law. So I'm assuming it fell upon you to take up the role as Master Distiller. What was that process at all difficult for you, or with your background, did you seem to jump right in, or how's the learning been with it?
Oh yeah, it was really, we didn't hire any consultants, right? It was just me trying to figure everything out. I luckily have some background in construction. Like I said, I was a woodworker. Didn't know a ton about plumbing and electric when I did, but a lot of people don't know being a master distiller is actually being an electrician. It's being a plumber. It's being all these other things. I don't just get to sit around in the back and drink whiskey all day, as much as I would love to do that. So we just started throwing shit at the wall until stuff sucked. I mean, we basically learned everything by breaking and messing it up. And we started with a setup that was 55 gallons, and was cobbled together by me with zero experience, and are now on a 2,500 gallon, Vendome, hopefully to have our continuous system set up within the year.
Wow. That's impressive. Yeah. Very much so. We're actually almost at the end of round one already, man. It's crazy how fast these go, but let's jump back to the whiskey, Matt. Let's talk about the palate and the finish on this one. I don't know. Yeah. Julian, you did a great job, man. If you want to jump in and talk about the palate and the finish on this one, what you get, that'd be great.
So the thing I love about the high corn recipe, and what you usually kind of get maybe from malted barley or wheat, in a 4-grain is the sweetness. But the sweetness from a 99 corn it's not front of palate, it's not back of palate, it's not finish, it's the whole time. So you get that coating sweetness the whole time, and I get a ton of vanilla and caramel on all of these, right? And it's really the dominant flavors. Like you said, there's maybe a little bit of medicinal florality there at the end. There may be a little bit of barrel. There may be a little bit of tartness, that tannin, right? Some stone fruit, but it's really kind of like just a sweet bomb. It really is.
Yeah. Matt, what about you, man? What do you get?
I agree. There's a soft sweetness that comes from the corn, and like you were saying, Julian, it's the entire time. It doesn't hit early and fizzle out. It doesn't show up late and hang around for too long. It's just a really nice continuous balance of a good sweet drinking bourbon. Then I pick up that soft corn, that sweetness of the corn into a little bit of cornbread, a lot of vanilla in there. I pick up like a taffy or a buttermint kind of like flavor on it as well. There is something herbal with it. And then the finish on this is nice and warm, good spicy cinnamon on the finish, a nice heat. The barrel influence, I think, really shows up. Those 4 char space sides come through on the finish. Some of that char, some of that oak, those lignin notes really come in, do a lot with the finish on there. It's really nice.
Yeah, we've noticed that that really comes in kind of around year 4 and 5 for those, because as you well know, a 4-char barrel, right, that'll put down a lot of barrel flavor fairly quickly, but the oxygenation takes some time to catch up to really esterify and add complexity to those barrel notes. And really around 4 or 5 years, these barrels really start to bloom with that awesome stuff that happens there at the end.
Do you notice that, Matt, as they start to, sorry, Mark, to interrupt, but as they start to get a little older, are they getting too much of that char 4? Is it cutting through some of the corn? Like some of those?
In fact, I would say they're less aggressive than we anticipated.
Really?
So we have our oldest barrels that we own from MGP with this mash bill are about 11 years old. We will talk a little later about some older releases that we have coming up, but I anticipated this maybe being a mash bill that, at 12 years would drink like a 15 or a 17. Mm-hmm. Its maturation has slowed down considerably towards the end, even being in Speyside 4-chars. So we really think this one might bloom out to the 18 and 20s.
Wow.
Which I would not have predicted at all. If I did this, I would have said exactly what you intimated, right? It's going to get real barrely and we got to get it out of there, right? It's just going to start tasting like barrel. It's going to be that motor oil over oaked stuff that we've probably all paid too much for at one point, right? But it's happening completely opposite of that, which I'm pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. Matt, you talked about the spicy cinnamon. I think that surprised me. I wasn't expecting that. Plus the fact that I forgot, I was thinking that this was 103 and then I forgot that it was 118.
That does a little bit for the spice.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm a high proof guy. So yeah, I was right in my alley, but I was just like, and I was like, it's a higher proof. So, but no, I really like it. Like you guys said, the sweetness that you get. And to me, it's almost, to me, I'm going to say a little like butterscotchy. You talk about the vanilla and caramel. So to me, it's kind of a little butterscotch flavor that I really like. And then that cinnamon kind of kicks in, that spiciness. You feel it on your palate. Nice, long, lingering finish. Really nice. Pleasant job on this. I mean, great job on this pleasant finish. Everything's really nice, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, very cool. Well, guys, we are actually at the end of round 1 here. So I'll tell you what, why don't we just take a quick break? We can get a word from our sponsors, and we'll come back with more with Julian Jones with West Fork Whiskey Co. in just a minute.
Three Chord's line of whiskeys embody the spirit of creativity. The whiskey is a true collaboration between producer and composer Neil Giraldo and master blender distiller Ari Sussman. The 3 Chord team of expert blenders, coopers, and sensory professionals have developed a multi-step process they called Perfectly Tuned Taste. This process begins by carefully selecting the finest bourbon and rye whiskeys from Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana, and then blending them together. Find out more about the whiskeys and distribution in your area at www.3chordbourbon.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back for round 2 of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me here tonight, live in the Bourbon Life Studios, it is my good friend, Matt. Matt, how are you doing out there in the fireplace room?
Mark, I'm great. You got the fireplace howling out here, nice and warm for a good January evening. How are you in Mission Control?
Doing great, man. Everything's well, you know what? I shouldn't have said that, but everything's running smoothly. But I'm going to knock on this particle board desk, and hopefully that'll pull us through, man.
Sure hope so.
Well, we're having a good conversation. We're having a good time, man. Drinking some good whiskey so far. I'm excited about this, man. I'm excited about this one because our host told us a little something before we started recording about this one maybe being one of his favorites. So I'm really excited to jump into that. But of course, we are the Bourbon Life Podcast. We appreciate all of our sponsors. We appreciate everything they do for us. Couldn't bring you this show each week without all their help and support. So thank you to all of our sponsors. Matt, with that said, you want to tell everybody who we have with us?
Absolutely. Julian Jones is the co-founder and master distiller at West Fork Whiskey Co. in Westfield, Indiana. Julian, welcome on back for the second round here of the Bourbon Life Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Excited about round two.
Yeah, man. I'm excited about this one because we got something special. Well, now you don't have it because you've already drank all yours.
I don't, but I know this one quite well. So
yeah, that's great. But this is well, I'll let you tell everybody what we're drinking.
yeah.
I'll just hold the bottle.
We talked in the first segment about our Old Hamer line. It's kind of split in two. Old Hamer being the base releases, which are 80 proof, 100 proof single barrel, and cask strength. The Hugh Hamer line, which Hugh Hamer was the patriarch of the Hamer family, is some of the oldest and best barrels from that. We take those and we finish them. And two of the most popular finishes by far have been our rum finish and our double oak. Our rum finish, which we are drinking now. And that generally spends around 5 years in its first barrel. Again, being a Speyside Char 4 at 99% corn, 1% malted barley from MGP. At that point, we select the best and best fitting barrels, we think, for rum finishes. And those go into either Cruzan or Barbados rum barrels. Mainly Cruzan lately, and I'd like to make that kind of our only. I really think those do the best things, but some of them are blends, and generally from the Cruzan I get more spice, from the Barbados I get more sweetness, but they both do really, really cool stuff. This is a Cruzan in front of us, finished in the barrel, the Cruzan barrel, for about usually at least a year and a half, if not sometimes 2 years.
Wow. Okay. So you're talking about 6.5, 7-year-old whiskey by the time the finishing's actually done.
And now we can count the second barreling as well in the age statement.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I keep forgetting that, man. So, but I'm glad. Thanks for pointing that out, because used to you couldn't do that, right?
Nope,
so
you couldn't. It was only primary barreling. So
primary barreling. Yeah. So again, and this one comes in at 103 proof, which is what I thought the first.
Correct. Yeah. So we take both our Hugh Hamer, really all of our Hugh Hamer line at this point down to 103. We did a lot of testing, cask strength, not 100, 95. We really didn't want to do something as low proof as your everyday drinker. We didn't want to take it all the way up to cask, in that we hope to bring out some notes of the rum, but also some notes of the high corn finish that we talked about in the first segment. All that awesome sweetness and mouth coating, and just that little bit of spice at the end. We want that to be still present, but also have some really nice rum notes that just are very well integrated that whole time. We felt like taking it down just a little bit really helped that interplay out, so it's not dominated by one or the other flavor.
So, Julian, I'm just curious, as we're talking, and Matt, I'll jump over to the nose here in a second, but this thought just popped in my head, so I wanted to get it out before I forgot it. When you're doing this and you're picking these barrels, obviously you've got the ones you're releasing, like the cask strength, so you're not doing any type of finishing with those. The other ones you talked about that are in the Old Hamer lineup that aren't finished. The Hugh Hamer, you're picking barrels. Are there any specifics or any type of thing that you're looking for on those barrels, and you're saying, okay, these are the ones that I want to pull? They're going to finish because I think they're going to lend well to rum, or they're going to lend well to double oaking, or they're going to, what's the process in that?
Yeah, generally my philosophy is I try and let the barrel tell me where it wants to go. If it is already full bodied and has more spice, I lean into that generally, and I would put that into a double oak so that it really kind of accentuates, because the 99.1 corn recipe is very malleable. I've done it the other way too, where I picked a very soft sweet and put it into a double oak. That generally takes longer to get those flavors that we generally want out of a double oak. The same with the rum finish, right? We're drinking the rum finish right now. If I pick a really soft sweet barrel from MGP, the 99.1, it lends itself to having a better integration of flavor more quickly. Whereas if I pick a more full-bodied one, it just takes longer for it to get to where it's good. Not that both can't be the right answer, but generally I like to lean into where the barrel's telling me. So if it's a full-bodied, more spicy, I'll put it into a new American oak barrel. If it's a little softer and sweeter and smoother, I'll throw it in a rum barrel.
Makes perfect sense. Matt, let's jump back over, unless you had a question. It looked like you had something on your mind there,
What
man.
size are you doing for batches on these?
These are generally 1 to 3 barrels max as well.
Ah, okay. So again, a lot of blending, a lot of tasting, sampling, and then proofing down to get everything right.
We're such a small distillery and really small volume at this point. We like to get every bit of the barrel out of every single one of these barrels that we do. And we do pull periodically based on, we don't think it's going to get any better, right? It's over oaked, whatever. Mm-hmm. But generally with these Hughs and these old Hamers, MGP is very good at what they do, right? Their tastes are very tight. We can be pretty liberal with our aging. We try and keep them in the barrel as long as we possibly can and afford to in order to try and get the best product out that we can.
Yep, very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, what do you think about the nose on this, man?
It's the influence is definitely there from the rum, from the rum cache, the Cruzian rum. It's got a sweetness that is kind of a throw over to the 99.1 mashbill, but there are like kind of rougher, brighter edges on either side of it. There's like a little more sugar cane, a little more molasses sweetness, less of that soft and subtle corn sweetness. A little brighter. There's almost like a touch of like a sweet citrus or like banana or like something, a coconut note on the nose as well that comes across. It's taking that 99.1 mash bill and like just, taking that smooth kind of rounded flavor and just like shooting out the sides of the sweetness a little bit more with some other really nice flavors, that crystallized sugar, those molasses notes. It's just really nice. I think it's a really good integration, a really good way to take the mash bill.
Yeah, I agree. But generally, that corn takes it into more of like a cornbread, sweet corn type sweetness. Whereas when you put it in the rum barrel, right, it takes it to more of a saccharine, sugary florality. That's less stone fruit, more tropical fruit, right?
Yeah, yep. I was thinking like a brown sugary, type of an aroma. Almost, it's kind of funny because at one point it almost got it reminded me something of a very lightly toasted marshmallow. When you pull it apart and you get that really nice sweetness, but you get a little bit of that toasted kind of aroma to it.
Yep.
So kind of that combination of flavors just kind of stuck out. Now I can't find that again now that I said that.
Hey, you found it once.
But Matt, you said coconut? Did you say
coconut?
Coconut?
It kind of has like a toasted coconut or like a bruleed pineapple, like kind of the burnt side of a pineapple upside down cake nose to it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that's really cool too, because and of course it is a little lower proof, but I mean, it's the same mash bill, same type of barrels. So you're taking that same baseline bourbon and you're just really getting to see that influence of those rum barrels on this.
We're really excited about the 99.1 corn recipe because it really lends itself well to every type of finishing that we have put it in. We did a white wine barrel finish. We realized why people don't do those. But even that is starting to slowly become palatable. Again, actually, I may have lied to you early because that one may be 13 or 14 years old at this point, but we've set it aside to just be in timeout for a while with its dunce cap on. But yeah, I mean, port, wine, cabs, right? Maple syrup, honey, and obviously we have the double oak and the rum in front of us. They've all been amazing. It's a very malleable mash bill.
That's very, very cool, man. Really like the nose on this. And I've had a sip, but we'll talk about the palate and the finish here in a minute. So let's talk about the brand. Let's talk about West Fork itself. So you, your brother, and another partner. Now you guys were like best friends. Is that right?
Yeah. We all grew up together in Bedford. Yep.
Can't be best friends with your brother. I mean, I've got a brother, so we're not best friends. So.
Well, some days we're best friends. Sometimes we're mortal enemies, right? Luckily, we have very similar palates, so that helps. David is kind of the man out on that one. But yeah, we started from nothing, scratch. We didn't really know what we were doing. We didn't really honestly know what we were getting into. We're 10 years in now, so we do know now. But yeah, I mean, it's been awesome. It's been challenging. It's been all the things starting a business is. But you know, we all love bourbon. We live bourbon. We love to drink bourbon. We love to talk about bourbon. To anyone who will try our stuff. So really West Fork was born out of a love of bourbon whiskey and the fact that, you know, we have awesome hard water here in Indiana. We have the best corn and the best grains in the world, in our humble opinions. So the fact that in the early teens, things were getting kind of scarce, right? The good stuff, we were like, man, it's a travesty that there isn't something on the shelf that's coveted as a world-class whiskey from Indiana. And that really was our impetus to set out to make Indiana both known for whiskey, but also for world-class whiskey in a high corn kind of fashion.
So you guys started, was it 2014 or 15?
2004. It was right at the end of 2014 into the beginning of, I think, 2015. We were actually all enjoying our holiday breaks, and the federal government finally said, hey, go for it, guys. So over the holiday season, we packed up every day and went up. And luckily, we had some time off from our real jobs, because back at that point, we were all working a second job in order to try and make this work. So it actually gave us some time off around the holidays in order to try and figure out what the hell we were doing. So we just, you know, started on our 55-gallon setup, trying to make high corn mash bills, wheated bourbons, high rye bourbons, things we thought we liked, and here we are today.
Yeah, so you guys were distilling your own stuff pretty much from the get-go, correct?
Yeah, we did it completely backwards. In fact, we probably should have done it the other way around, say our accountants and business people. However, we actually cut our teeth making bourbon and whiskey for about 3 or 4 years before we actually sourced any product, which is the opposite that most people do.
That is absolutely the opposite.
We made it way harder on ourselves than we needed to, but the amount of knowledge we gained from just literally breaking and messing everything up was invaluable.
Yeah. So now West Fork, you have your own line.
Correct.
You guys do grain to glass. Can you kind of talk about that and those products and why grain to glass is so important?
Absolutely. So I feel like that is unfortunately starting to lose its meaning a little bit because it's overused, but what we do and the way we interpret that, right, is we get our grain from about 20 miles away from where we distill it, right? It's all grown there by a family farmer that I know and can call on the phone every day whenever I want to. He will grow whatever grain I want, however I want it. He will process it however I want it. A really awesome guy, really into spirits himself. So everything we do from the time that the grain is planted to grown, to harvested, to hits us, to when we make it into bourbon and age it is Indiana, right? Through and through, shown through our high corn mash bills, right? And our dedication to really leaning into Indiana-centric bourbon. Mm-hmm. And that's what our West Fork line is. I know we're not tasting any of that tonight, but that's in the kind of taller, more Buffalo Trace antique collection bottle, if you will. To throw out a favorite of mine, not made by myself. But all of that stuff is made by me in very small batches. In fact, generally at a barrel a time. We had a 600-gallon setup. It was a 600-gallon batch with a 4-plate, typical whiskey distillation column that we ran through a couple times. And here we are today, finally we started with 5-gallon barrels and went to 10-gallon barrels, 15s, 20s, 23s, 30s, 53s. Thankfully, I have only been filling 53-gallon barrels with West Fork distillate for almost 4 years now. So we're finally starting to get some what would be typically referred to or seen as, minimal aging for a quality product, right?
Right, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, people look at that 4 year, and it's for some reason that seems like the magic number for most people. Of course, then you don't have to put anything on your label either once you hit that 4 year mark, right?
Well, and I really think, it's the barrel, you can put down a bunch of barrel flavor really quickly, especially in small barrels, right?
Sure.
The magic is the oxidation. And as I always say, barrels are not permeable to liquid, but they are permeable to oxygen, right? It takes a long time for that oxygen to get in there. And it really happens really on more year 3, 4, 5, if you will, right? So that's the magic that I think really in addition to the surface area to volume relationship being the typical 53 gallon, kind of ratio that it is. But there really is some magic that happens, year 3, year 4, year 5 that turns it from kind of that new make, new orange, awful tasting bourbon to something that's magical and delicious.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point. And I think that's something, people, when they talk about being in the barrel, it's like, oh, it goes in and out of the barrel. The barrel contracts, it expands, it gets hot, it gets cold, and the liquid's going in and out. It's pulling all this flavor and color. And most people think that's it. That's what happens. I like the fact you're talking about the oxidation, the fact that oxygen, it gets in, it comes into the barrel, it goes into the whiskey, it breaks down, and they form these other, you talked about in the 3rd, 4th, 5th years. That it changes the profile. I mean, it's part of the entire maturation process. And I think a lot of people overlook that aspect of it and just think the barrel, that's it. Just the barrel is given the flavor, but there's more to it than that, right?
Oh, 100%. And it's perception, right? I mean, tasting science is in its infancy still. There is no computer or test that is as good as even the most novice of bourbon palates. So when you're talking about stuff like that, it's really art, not science, right? But it's guided by science, which is what's awesome about it.
So you had the West Fork whiskey, and then the Hamer brand. How long ago did you guys release that? When did that come around, and what was the thoughts behind creating that?
So I think that was actually, I can't take credit for that. That's my brother. He was researching old bourbons, Indiana history, right? How can we really share a piece of Indiana that's meaningful in a way for us, but still a source product, right? And that was really all born out of his brainchild and him. He reached out to MGP and was like, hey, we really want to do a high corn bourbon. And they were like, we may have the perfect thing for you. They were not selling any at that point. In fact, I think the samples that we got, and this would have been 2016, maybe 2017, were some of their first of the 99-1 corn recipe that they sent out. Totally new. Nobody was using it. Nobody knew what to do with it or what to think of it. We tasted it immediately and we're like, there is so much potential here. So much potential. So it really, it was my brother's brainchild, but we've really leaned into it because it is such an awesome Indiana thing and different, right? We're not going to out Kentucky, right? They've been making 4-grain bourbons for longer than many generations longer than we have, right?
Sure.
So we're trying to find not only like a way to differentiate ourselves, but also to bring something that's really tasty and different.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great idea. Matt, let's jump back to the palate and finish since we're almost at the end of round 2 here on this rum cask finish. Hugh Hamer bourbon. What do you pick up on that palate and finish?
There's that sweetness that came through on the nose right up front, kind of that brown sugar or that like brulee burnt sugar kind of molasses type note that comes across. Then the sweetness of the corn comes through, those big vanillas that we talked about, kind of that silky butterscotch or that caramel that we had mentioned. Then it takes another turn for me, and I get like a really creamy mouthfeel and kind of sweet, creamy, fruity, almost like creamsicle type note, tropical fruit, like almost some papaya. So like a really nice brightness of really good tropical fruit, and then a nice warm finish. I think the corn mash bill really takes off with the finish as well, kind of guided a little bit by that rum cask as well, but on the finish I get that beautiful 99-1.
And just that little bit of heat from the 103, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Not quite like the 118.
No. Purposefully so,
Yeah,
because that's really what lets those awesome tropical fruits come through at the end.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you get more of the burn and less of that kind of, typical awesome Cruzan rum barrel that you get.
Yep. Now, the funny thing for me, this one has almost a little bit more of a tannic finish on it to me, a little bit more drying. I mean, it's not overwhelming, but compared to the old Hamer that we had, so I don't know if the rum barrels have influenced it to that point, or if that extra time in the barrel maybe has added that somehow. It's not off-putting. I mean, sometimes you taste a bourbon and it's like, ooh, it's like chewing on a stave and your mouth's all dry. But it's funny because, again, just comparing these two, since we did them back to back, it's easy to pick out, oh, well, this one's a little different in this way. So this one does have a little bit more of a tannic finish on it to me. But again, those cinnamon notes come through. I talked about that, on the first one, that spiciness. Obviously the heat impact's not anywhere near like that 118. Still let you know it's 103, but I think it drinks in its proof point. So, but that rum just really has that nice, really sweet impact, and that brown sugary sweetness that comes through. I just absolutely love that. So very nice on this one as well, man.
Thank you.
Nice. Well, guys, we're at the end of round 2 already, believe it or not. So let's take a quick break, get a word from our sponsors, and we'll be back with more with Julian Jones with West Fork Whiskey Company in just a minute.
Welcome to the kitchen table at James B. Beam Distilling Company, where every visit is a celebration of tradition and flavor. Did you know that the kitchen table is nestled right within the heart of the distillery? That's right. You can experience the essence of James B. Beam's legacy while savoring their delectable dishes. Join them every Wednesday through Sunday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. for a culinary journey like no other. Planning a special event? Let the kitchen table be your host, creating unforgettable memories for you and your guests. And don't miss their upcoming Valentine's Day dinner on February 14th, featuring a 4-course meal highlighting the best of the kitchen table. For more information and reservations, visit beamdistilling.com. The kitchen table at James B. Beam Distilling Company. Come as a friend, leave as family.
All right, everybody, welcome back for the third and sadly final round of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me here tonight live in the Bourbon Life Studios, it is my good bourbon drinking friend, Matt. Matt, how you doing, buddy?
Mark, I am doing great. And yourself?
Doing great, man. Just this show has gone so fast. It's kind of hard to believe how quickly we've gone through this already, man. So can't believe we're at the third round here, but man, we're drinking some great stuff here tonight. I'm really excited about this. This has been a lot of fun, man. It's always good to discover some new stuff. And this is one of those episodes where it's just like, oh yeah, I'm so glad that we got to put this one together, man. So
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
For sure. All right, guys. Well, we are the Bourbon Life Podcast. Of course, we appreciate all of our sponsors, everything they do for us. We couldn't do the show every week without all their help and support. So thank you to all of our sponsors for everything they do for us. Matt, just in case anybody's tuning in randomly in the third round, do you want to tell everybody who we have with us tonight?
For all of our random third round listeners here this morning, this afternoon, this evening, whenever it is you're getting your third round of the Bourbon Life Podcast, we have the co-founder at Master Distiller at West Fork Whiskey Co. in Westfield, Indiana, just up north of Indianapolis, Julian Jones. Julian, welcome on back for the final round of the Bourbon Life Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excited to have this last dram with you guys.
Yeah, and I always have to thank our guests for not leaving. So thank you for not leaving, at some point during the show.
I'll probably be here for another hour or two having some, doing some work, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah, work.
Right.
Yeah, doing work. I get that. Yeah, for sure. Doing some work. Well, we've got something great poured up here for this third round. I'm excited to get into this one. If you want to just tell everybody about it, I'll just hold up the pretty bottle so everybody can see it.
Absolutely. So the third one we have here for our third round, this is our double oaked Old Hamer recipe whiskey. This is, again, 99% corn, 1% malted barley, generally in its first 4 char barrel from Speyside for about 4 to 5 years, and then in its finishing barrel anywhere from a year to 2. This is in fact our most popular release and our most also distinguished release. We almost won finished Bourbon of the Year at the San Francisco Spirits Awards.
Wow. Through
the Tasting Alliance with this. We were a finalist, went out there, had a bunch of fun, met a lot of really cool people. This is definitely by far our biggest award winner, and I think you guys will see why when you taste it. The 99% corn, 1% malted barley recipe lends itself incredibly well to finishing barrels, especially a second new barrel. So that's probably a good segue into what does it smell like?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Matt, I'll let you answer that question.
I pick up, so the sweetness that we've been picking up throughout the evening on that 99.1 corn to malted barley recipe is a little bit more subdued You don't get that like that corn, that really like soft but present sweetness right up front. I get a lot of barrel sweetness. There's like a lot of really nice, sweet, smoky flavors. A little bit of the cherry coming across that one would get from whiskey that's spent a lot of time in the barrel, or at least a lot of time with a lot of new char oak on it. There's that really nice sweetness, a little more fruity notes, and just like it's really tight. Like the flavors on the nose here, just like really concise. Some of that vanilla, those like butterscotch notes, just really great barrel influence. Like everything that when one thinks of like a good secondary barrel, or like a toasting kind of campfire marshmallow note, but certainly not like too far, not overly so. I'm just talking in circles now. I'm sorry, guys.
And it's all that beautiful Maillard stuff, right? The same stuff that makes brown bread delicious, the same stuff that makes caramel delicious, right? Mm-hmm. The sugars being burnt to the right amount, right? Mm-hmm. And being added in the right amount to the spirit.
Yeah. You know, Matt, it's fun doing these in succession like this, starting out with that Old Hamer cask strength and, you know, tasting or nosing that corn, feeling, you know, you get that really powerful sweet corn that we talked about, and then moving on to that rum cask finish where it's, you know, the rum cask has thrown in that brown sugary molasses type of aroma and flavors. A little bit of that corn comes through, but it's a different profile. And then we move to this one. And again, it's different. And I like the way you said that, Matt, that it was, it's like subdued in terms of that corn sweetness. That sweetness it wasn't like it was in your face, but the sweetness was just there. This is just a more subdued sweetness. You get that toastiness that you talked about. The oak sweet, I like the way you said the barrel sweetness. That makes a lot of sense. And that kind of smokiness. And the marshmallow thing again, you know, you said that, and to me, it's coming back out on this one again, kind of a toasted marshmallow, which is funny, but I got it on that rum cask. I thought there, at least a hint of it, but this one's more pronounced to me for sure. The vanillas as well, but yeah, very, very nice. That sweetness from the corn is still there, but it's just in a different form. Really cool.
I feel like that second barrel takes a lot of those sweet notes and turns them into more of a hug than they were right before, right? So you get more of we'll call this an Indiana hug, if you will, right, out of this one, and that it's got more sass, more body, more spice, more of those things you typically get from a 4-grain or a 3-grain bourbon. That is distinct, obviously, from a high corn cask and especially a rum finish. So.
Yeah. So this one again, I'm assuming kind of the same thing, like the 1 to 2, 3 barrel type of batching process on this one.
This one I know for a fact was a single barrel.
Oh, nice. Okay, all right. Now, so when you do that again, and I think Matt had kind of asked this question maybe earlier about the profile. So when you're batching, are you just, and you mentioned something about letting barrels kind of guide you in the process. So is that really the overall drive? It's just where the barrels lead you. So it's not necessarily that if you have a small batch of the rum finish, it's going to taste exactly the same as the batch that you did maybe 3 months ago. I mean, kind of the process.
Yeah. So given that it's 1 to 3 barrel batches, right? We're not dealing with 60,000 barrel, 80,000 barrels, right? It's hard to hit the same tasting profile every time. The way I like to describe it is we aren't shooting for necessarily the same tasting profile. We're shooting for the same quality profile or above. And we do. I lean into it with this 99.1 corn because I feel like that's the best way that it plays. Generally, the more discordant the flavors are of the 2 barrels going together with this 99.1, the longer it takes for them to kind of become friends and make a good product. But if I have a more full-bodied and peppery 99.1 corn that comes through, I will put that in a second new oak barrel. And we were talking a little bit earlier about blending and kind of our approach. This is a great one to talk about that because we have used everything from light toast to 4-char and toast under 4-char for the finishing on these barrels, and they all do something cool and different. Mm-hmm. We are still very much experimenting with this finish. In that we have lots of those going at different ages and we like them for different reasons. And we're kind of trying to figure out what we like, what the market likes, what everyone thinks is cool. We know that they're great, right? But how do we fine tune that in, using a toast and then char, right? A just toast, a heavy char, and everything in between. So this is a great one to talk about blending, because this one really does come down to picking the batches that are complementary to each other. So you can lean into that more kind of Kentucky or Indiana hug, full-bodied bourbon experience.
Yeah, it's a great point to talk about too, especially coming from you, Julian, as blender distiller, in even sticking with new charred oak. So we're not even talking about going other directions with wine finishes or other finishes that might be out there, spirit finishes, of just the variety of different barrels you can do. You're saying you've done toast under char. I'm sure you've played around with 4 char, 2 char down heads. Like there's so much variance within the barrel, and what we can do in aging with different barrels, that I'm sure the playground for figuring out what works well, what doesn't go together, what flavor profiles you get from this barrel, what the toast on these heads with this char plays like together. It's got to just add another layer of complexity, but at the same time, I think that would be really fun to map
really
that project out.
And there's a lot of cool new barrel tech out there. There's people doing very fancy cuts through the barrel and toasting, just kind of barrel 101, right? Like there's 2 parts of the barrel that you really talk about, subtractive and additive flavoring, right? That char layer is your subtractive or Brita filter type, right? And then that wood layer underneath is your additive area where you get those wood flavors from, right? If you toast that wood underneath, it changes it. If you char at a different level, it changes it, right? There's so many different nuances. People just think a second new barrel, right? Like that's so boring. But there are so many different ways you can do a double oak. I think people probably who aren't, keeping their nose or ear really to the grindstone on this, maybe don't realize there's just as much variation in a second new barrel for a double oak as there is in picking a type of brandy for a brandy finish or a type of rum for a rum finish.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's for just a blanket term of double oak, it's nice to finally talk about everything that goes into actual double oak. I think that's something that we've actually not really taken our listeners down the path of, but hearing you talk about it, where double oak doesn't just mean second oak barrel. It can mean so many different things with the different tech of the barrel and different specifications on the barrel. It's nice to let everybody know that when it says double oak, it's not just barrel to barrel. There's intentionality, there's thought behind it. So thanks for kind of bringing the veil back on the curtain on that one, letting our listeners in on it.
And there's also, we can do stave editions at that point, right? Like Maker's 46, right? So there's double oak is a wide open category that a lot of people are just starting to explore, and they know they like it, but they don't know why they like it. And there are a lot of notes there to hit for different releases, for different ways and different finishes, but I love it. It's like I said, our bestseller, our most awarded. And I think it's because we are starting to really tease out that nuance of what makes this a second barreling a really good double oak.
Yep. Very nice. I like the nose. I've already tasted it, but I'm not going to say anything about that yet, but we'll save that for just a little bit later. All right. So we talked about this off camera. I told you I was going to ask you about it. So now comes the funny part of it. No, I'm just kidding. But when I was prepping for the show, I kept seeing things online about the West Fork Whiskey Company with no E in whiskey. And I was going to make a reference to that. And then I looked at your bottles and it says West Fork Whiskey with an E in it. And I thought, well, I've got to ask you about this. So we had a discussion off camera and debated about whether or not we're going to talk about it. We're talking about it though. So Julian, what's going on with the E and no E, man? There you go. You lean forward with the hat. We can see the hat. There's no
marketing.
E.
It's marketing versus reality, right? The T-shirt too, right? We also dropped the I there, so I don't even know where that's from.
I didn't even catch that.
Exactly, right? No, that's just it. You've seen those funny things where they add just the right amount of consonants, and you can still read the whole thing without any of the vowels actually being in there. I think that's what our marketing team thought. Again, I didn't grow up in Scotland in the 1800s, or Ireland or England. So I don't have super strong feelings about the way that whiskey should be spelled.
Okay. All right.
But everyone does.
Sure.
And obviously there are some religious kind of implications there as well for some of the spellings. But I just think it's funny. I just think it's funny, like that people care so much about the way the word is spelled. I just like to drink a delicious whiskey. I don't care how you spell it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it's funny because when you read certain books and things, you know, it's like whiskey and the E is in parentheses, just so nobody will be offended. But then you talked about being a Scotch drinker. Of course, you know, Scotch.
Get that E out of there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you know you offend everybody if you put the E in there if they're a Scotch drinker. So,
well, I can't even use the S word over here. It's all single malts, right?
Yeah,
I found that out when I was doing my first single malt label. I put the word Scotch on it, and they're like, "No, you can't even put that word on there." It's like
can't do it. No, can't use that word unless it's made and distilled and produced there in Scotland, mm-hmm. right? So. You know, they're kind of like that over there, I guess. So who knows?
Hey, to each their own. Spell it however you want to. Just buy and enjoy our whiskey.
There you go. That's right. That's right. You know, we're kind of at that point. We're speaking of kind of the future and things of that nature. Let's kind of talk about some things that you might have coming up. I mean, releases, things with the distillery, any type of news or any type of upcoming things that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, so a couple exciting things that we have coming up. We are hopeful to launch a number of tasting experiences in the Indianapolis area. So if you are lucky enough to be seeing this podcast in an area where you could get close to us, there should be some more ways to enjoy us in 2025. But as far as releases that we can hopefully get in your hands through online sales, we have a 10-year-old 100 proof of the 99% corn, 1% malted barley recipe that will be our next big release for this recipe. And I can tell you it's phenomenal. We just got our first 4 barrels in from the warehouse that we were keeping it at, and I sampled them today, and they are amazing. The first release is likely to be a single barrel. At most, I would think a double barrel batch. So these are going to be incredibly small as well. So there will be some cool variation. But like we talked about in part 2, you know, we were a little worried that things would get really barrely towards the end, 10, 12, 14 years, given that these are in 4 chars. But it's actually happened the other way around. They're really just starting to bloom at 10 years, 12 years. So these are really exciting releases, and I think they will be incredibly receptive from the bourbon drinkers because they have so much awesome nuance and complexity and sophistication that you know, extra 4 or 5 years on top of your typical 4 or 5 year old release add. So that is another huge one for us. The other being, we're hoping to expand West Fork a little bit. That's our grain to glass that we've talked about in some of these others, right? This brand that we have right here. And that's the stuff I actually make here in Indianapolis. We're hoping to, now that we have 53-gallon barrels that are 4 years old, expand some bottled and bond releases for both my wheated bourbon and my high rye bourbon. And that you should be able to hopefully order those online, and that will be actually our grain to glass distillate that is farmed to tabled right here in Indianapolis with love.
Very cool. One question I was going to ask you about the Hamer line. That's all sourced. We talked about that.
Yep.
Is there any plan? Is it going to continue just to be sourced barrels, or do you think some point that you guys may take it in-house since you're getting those barrels that are at that 4-year-old point?
Yeah, so we've talked about that and bounced that around. It looks like, in fair and full disclosure, that we will just continue to have a contracted recipe with MGP.
Yeah, okay.
We've worked with our investors to secure a large portion, if not a large majority, of the 99% one recipe that comes out of MGP every year. So what we will likely do with our expanded capacity is lean more into some of the higher corn recipes that we have coming out. And just to preview, right, my next big recipe that'll come out is an 8866, and that's 88% corn, 6% rye, and 6% malted barley, and it's awesome. And it's really cool what some of the high corn recipes do with just a little bit of what the traditional flavor grains are, right? Or the flavor grains that are considered the traditional flavor grains. So in short, no. the plan is not to bring West Fork, or not to bring Old Hamer production in house.
Okay.
It is to expand our own in-house offerings, but also continue to expand our relationship with MGP in order to hopefully get it to as many people as would like to enjoy it.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. So speaking of which, Matt, why don't we jump back over, because we're almost at the end here. Again, crazy how fast this has gone tonight. But let's jump back over, talk about palate finish on this one. Matt, what do you pick up on this double oaked?
So the barrel influence comes through right away for me. And surprisingly enough, and this might just be me kind of thinking a little bit further outside the box, but there's like a roasted malt type flavor that comes, like, I know it's just 1% malt on here, but maybe some of that playing with this new chart, the secondary barrel, but it's got kind of a roasted malty cereal, like sweet cereal note that I'm tasting that I wasn't tasting on either of the other two offerings, either the Old Hamer or the Hugh Hamer in the rum finish that we had at first. Then I get that nice cherry, a little cherry, a little char from the barrel. That oak comes through. There's cinnamon, and then kind of like a sweet cocoa or like a mocha type flavor, like a little bit of coffee, a little bit of the cocoa come through on the finish with that the sweet corn, those vanillas like go long on the finish, and that heat, that the warm, long, not like super spicy, just warming finish that we've had kind of throughout all three of these. I think has been a reoccurring theme, is really present on that helps to round out the influence from the second barrel. I can see why this is a product to hang your hat on. This is excellent.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and some people get almost a very light smokiness to this one. Sometimes if I think about it really hard, I can get that, but I think that's why I like it, because I used to like smoky scotches, as we talked about earlier, but I'm kind of off put by smoky flavor being anything close to a dominant flavor, but there is some kind of roasty, smoky thing in this that just sits right down there in such subtlety that it's just suggestion, right? It's certainly not a 4-player in the flavor profile.
Yeah, Matt, I like the fact you talked about maybe like a hint of coffee at the end. It's almost like a roasted coffee bean type of flavor at the end that I pick up. But you get that sweetness, and again, it's a different kind of sweetness. You know, it's that barrel sweetness. It's not, you get the corn sweetness, but it's like you talked about in the nose being subdued. So it's just been a lot of fun for me to taste through these and taste the impact that the different barrels have and the different ways in terms of the sweetness. You know, just the different sweet profiles that you're able to generate using the same mash bill, the same recipe, same type of barrels, but then using those finishing barrels to add those extra dimensions to it. It's been a lot of fun to do that, man. But yeah, I really like this, and I agree with Matt. I can see why this one's been very successful for you guys, Julian. So congratulations on that. So if people want to come visit you guys, what can they expect on a trip to West Fork Whiskey Co.?
Yeah, so we have a lot of fun things going on. The facility itself, we have an on-site family-friendly restaurant. We have a speakeasy style handcrafted cocktail bar. We have an event center, and obviously a full production and warehousing suite on site. So you can do a lot of all the awesome things that make a craft distillery what it is. We kind of have, and I'm the head of education and agritourism as well. We didn't cover that, but we kind of have 2 different tours that we do at this point, as well as we do, our most popular classes we do a chocolate pairing, which is amazing. We have a local chocolatier that does some crazy cool stuff that pairs really well with some of our bourbons. And another really popular class that we are offering currently that I run exclusively is our blend your own bourbon. So we have an array of all of our bourbon recipes, and we go through my kind of approach to blending and tasting. We taste out of the barrel, and then we actually blend your own bourbon. But then we have 2 different kind of tours. One is a quick and dirty. This is what we do. This is kind of a tasting, and then we have a longer thieving tour where you actually taste out of the barrel. We go in depth about our production techniques and show you more of the facility. So there's really a lot to be seen and tasted at West Fork. And And there are more classes, hopefully, that will be announced soon that I am working on in the background. So,
very cool. Julian, I always like to ask our guests before we close it up for the evening, what's been your favorite part of this journey for you so far?
Oh, man. Getting to drink bourbon that I made that I actually like.
That's cool.
I will tell you, I'm not a huge fan of small barrel bourbon, and I don't think many of your listeners probably are either. There's a reason we put it in big barrels for a long time. Mm-hmm. Given that we did not start with a silver spoon in our mouths, it took us a long time to get to the point where like I felt like I could pull something out of the barrel and be proud about it, and I am really starting to come into that. And I the other two co-founders will tell you I'm the worst salesman that you could ever have, because if it were up to me, we probably would have released 0 products because it's not good enough yet. But finally starting to hit our stride where I feel like we're a respectable bourbon maker in the eyes of people who, you know, only drink 10-year-old, 12-year-old Kentucky bourbon, right? And that's been the most rewarding thing to me, is to drill a barrel and be like, man, I would take this home and drink it. And not
that's
have
awesome.
to fake it.
Yeah, man. I can't imagine that feeling.
Fake it till you make it, right?
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Right.
Oh, man. So where can people find more information about your products, and where can they actually get your products?
Yeah, absolutely. So westforkwhiskey.com, we actually just went through a website redesign to hopefully bring you better information in a more digestible format. We're expanding our partnerships with all of our online retailers in that hopefully everyone who is legally allowed to be shipped whiskey could go to our website and find a button that says, hey, if I want to try a West Fork product, if I want to try an Old Hamer product, if I want to try a Hugh Hamer product, that will be easily accessible right on westforkwhiskey.com. Right. So that's where I would point everyone for your newest, hottest information. And we are working as hard as we can to get as much of our product in anyone who is awesome enough to try its mouth.
Awesome. And you guys on social media as well?
Absolutely. Twitter, TikTok, I guess.
I think it's still there. Yeah, it's still there.
We'll see about all that. Facebook, Instagram. I am going to, so I'm not a traditional, I'm like one of the last generation. I feel like that I don't have a large Facebook profile. I don't have a large Instagram profile, but I do have a really awesome Twitter handle that I've been keeping in weight at the Whiskey Jesus. That will hopefully start posting some really cool behind the scenes stuff that your listeners and viewers would really like to see, right? Cooking temperatures, enzymes, right? Like our whole thing is being radically open about what we do. So that's going to hopefully be kind of a behind the scenes, like, hey, this is the life of a distiller. This is what I do every day. Nuts and bolts, no holds barred, everything I use, how I do it.
Yeah.
Full access.
Very cool. That sounds great, man. So any final thoughts, Julian, before we wrap it up tonight?
No, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you guys having me on as a young and hungry whiskey distiller. You know, I've been in this game 10 years. I still feel like I'm very much a neophyte and learning every day. But I love interacting and talking about bourbon. So please come and see me. I'm usually at the distillery. So come bug me. Let's talk about bourbon.
Yeah, we appreciate that very much. Matt, any final thoughts, man, before we close it up?
Julian, thanks for sitting down with us, with our listeners here, running us through everything you all have been doing. I'm super impressed. I love what we tasted tonight. Can't wait till dry January is over, like Mark's been saying, on and on and on. And I am going to actually, I will come and see you all. I'm excited to see what's going on. We've got good friends in Indianapolis. I will make the trip to come see you, because I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff going on behind the scenes there, and I'm excited for you all. So thanks again.
Absolutely. Hey, I appreciate it. That's awesome.
Very cool. Julian, yeah, thank you so much, man. Thanks for sharing this with us. Really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us again on short notice, but I'm glad we were able to get this worked out, man. It's been a lot of fun, very informative, great to get to know you as well. And like Matt said, I don't have friends in Indianapolis, but maybe at some point I'll just tag along.
You have one now.
That I do, right? And then I can go to my favorite steakhouse up there and have some shrimp cocktail.
Yeah, spicy one.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, guys, we appreciate you guys tuning in. You know, we know there's a lot of podcasts out there, so we appreciate you taking the time to join us every week and checking out what we've got to offer. We appreciate all of our sponsors. Of course, we could not bring you this show every week without all their help and support, so we appreciate them. And like Matt always says, whatever time of day it is, morning, noon, or night, whenever it is you get your Bourbon Life fix, we just appreciate you guys listening and tuning in. If you have any questions for us, any ideas, suggestions, etc., just feel free to email us at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. You can also find us, of course, on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. Also join our private Facebook group, The Bourbon Lifers. We'd love to have you join us in there. And don't forget our good friend, Big Chief. Mike's doing a great show under our umbrella called The Whiskey Trip. Be sure to check that out. That comes out every Tuesday under our platform. So if you're subscribed to our podcast, you'll get Mike's podcast every Tuesday called The Whiskey Trip. He's also on Instagram and Facebook doing some great stuff. So give him a like and a follow and check out his podcast as well. With that said, I'm going to wrap it up. Send us home with our tagline, which is, may your glasses always be full and may you keep on living the bourbon life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Our mission at the Bourbon Life is simple, to share our passion for all things bourbon with you every week. And we'd really love to hear your thoughts on how we're doing. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. You can also contact us by email at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. And you can always find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have a moment, we'd love it if you would rate us and give us a review. So until next week, we hope your glass is always full and that you keep on living the bourbon life.